You are listening to another episode of Smash the Bug. I'm your host, Joseph Maxwell here, and I'm excited to bring on another guest. His name is Ryan Keelaghan from Charlotte, North Carolina. He's the principal web engineer at CBD MD, so if you are in need of some CBD oil or whatever else CBD related they sell, that might be a place to check out. Because you know, and we're bringing on the person or one of the great people that keeps that brand running, keeps that brand up to date. Working at a merchant brings its own interesting challenges because it's you that's completely responsible if something goes down. And so I'm looking forward to hearing some of Ryan's conversation here today with some of the challenges that he's faced, but more importantly than the challenges that he's faced, because after all, we all face challenges. It's how he gets through those challenges that makes the biggest difference of all. So I'm really excited to hear. So I hope you'll stay listening to this conversation. As always, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the Smash the Bug podcast on whatever your favorite podcast platform is. Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. And of course, you can find us on the Swift Otter channel on YouTube, where these great episodes are also published. So without further ado, let's welcome Ryan here to this conversation. Welcome, Ryan. It's good having you here, my friend.
Thank you so much, man. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Maybe you want to just give me a brief overview of what you do at CBD MD. And just to be clear, I almost slipped up and said WebMD. It's not WebMD. You corrected me already on that once. That That's MD right. Is catchy there. So CBD MD, what do you do there? What does it mean to have the title Principal Web Engineer?
That's a good question, because if it's something where I grew into position at the company and sort of had to come up with a accurate way of describing my duties. Nice. I started out at the company as lead backend developer, where I managed a few guys, I put together releases, that sort of a thing. But as time goes on, you start a new company, you find new roles, new things to take on. And now I have a manager underneath me and everything. So At the end of the day, reflecting on the myriad of tasks and responsibilities, I came across, my coworker sent me a document about the concept of a principal web engineer, and it just sort of fits. It fits what my day-to-day tasks are. Well,
that's good. And congratulations for working up into that position. That's a lot of hard work, a lot of learning, and good for you on achieving that. So in coming on this show, I love to ask people, what was some of the greatest challenges or the greatest challenge to overcome to get to this place in your career? So what would your answer to that question be?
Going back on my biggest challenges, you'll always have a project that puts you in a new place, and sometimes it's a little scary to be there. You're unsure how to do something. You want to make sure you get it done right, but also done quick. So there's a lot of challenges to every task you work on.
Absolutely.
But in my history of Magento development, which is almost a decade at this point, for me, the biggest challenges in Magento come from doing upgrades. And in many occasions at various jobs, I've had to do upgrades from 1.6 to 1.9, or a version 1 Magento to a version 2 Magento upgrade. Right. And I think when it comes to challenges, nothing compares to having dozens of extensions and libraries and everything. Make sure they get transferred from the old version to the new version. It's rough, and you get one chance to do it right. You can only turn that power button on one time when you're ready to go live. So
that's right.
Version upgrades are rough.
I totally understand. I get that. And again, it's because it's maybe if it was a tiny website, those version upgrades wouldn't be such a big deal. But I know the site you're working on, I'm guessing, is incredibly large, sprawling. There's a lot to watch out for. And some of the sites we work on the same way, it's like, well, I will turn this around as a question to you. How do you make sure that an upgrade goes smoothly? You've obviously been through quite a few at this point, so I'm sure you have a plan. As long as it's not top secret, what can you tell us about these plans that this plan that you've developed, the general idea that ensures that these upgrades go smoothly?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it is normally top secret, but I'll tell you.
Okay.
Just don't share this
Yeah,
with
we
anyone
will
else.
keep it
Promise.
between you, me, and the fence post.
Perfect. You, at the very number one rule when it comes to doing a upgrade like that is to allow yourself patience. It's going to take a long time because you want to do it right. I've started them in the past, especially when I've been brought onto a project, and my first thing there is change this from Magento 1 to Magento 2. The very first thing you need to do is make sure you have a good overall idea of how the system works as a whole, how the extensions work with each other, how all the modules play well, what preferences and plugins that have been added, but also making sure that there aren't little bits of the code that someone might miss. Like maybe there's a directory that they sometimes run commands off to do manual upgrades or something. So get an idea of the code base and how well everything plays with each other. And once you have that down, it's just make a list, start with the first module, and just do one by one. Get them all little by little converted from the old version to the new version. And you start off with that. You eventually get into all the core upgrades and everything. And like I said, it's just patience. It's tough because there's no instruction manual on it whatsoever. Magento have had migration scripts that they've had before, but it never is an out of the box. It's not an out of the box solution. That you're always going to have to do a bunch of stuff yourself. Database changes, upgrading an order database table from Magento 1 to Magento 2. It's very difficult and takes a lot of patience. But if you have that, then it'll all work out in the end.
Yes. Well, I think that's one interesting aspect you bring up there is the patience, which it's hard in at least some cases to communicate the idea that this much time is necessary. Because like from a developer's perspective, many developers, I can't obviously speak to your situation, but there's a lot of developers who are under pressure to get stuff done quickly. And how hard can an upgrade be, right? So upgrades 2.3 to 2.4, whatever, on the Magento side, there's going to be some breakage, but it can't be that difficult, right? But at the end of the day, in my experience, it's always more difficult than one thinks. And in my experience, what always kills me is the stuff that is out of the way. Like we can get the major journeys dealt with, the admin experience dealt with, all that's good, but it's that cron job or off to the side that you might not normally think about. That's what really causes grief in the long run. Okay, why in the world does that stop running? Oh, okay.
Yep. And that patience I was talking about, it kind of has to extend to the company as a whole.
Yes.
Because that's a perfect example of something like, you might not think about there's cron jobs you have to copy over, something like that, and all of a sudden you might have some issues. Something might come up unexpected might come up where an API call has stopped working, and as a whole, the company needs to have patience with that. The owners need to know that things might go wrong with sales. It sometimes happens. You got to prepare for it, or else it'll surprise you in a really bad way. So as long as everyone has patience and understanding,
for sure,
you'll be good.
That's good. And it also comes back to the developer to communicate the need for that, right? For someone like me, I will say this: I am very optimistic. And in a lot of cases, I myself can hit those expectations, but it's also when coming to estimating other people's work, I still end up struggling with that. It's like, okay, where are they at to be able to do this? Versus, I've been in, obviously, you and I have both been in the platform for close to a decade or more. And so the time it takes for us to do something is less than maybe for some other people. How do you balance that out? It can be tricky across the board, but that's good.
Time estimates are one of the most most difficult things. Yeah. I struggle with them to this day. It's because you never know. And like you said, one developer's 2 hours is another developer's 8 hours, or someone else's 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And it can even vary. It's not like, okay, somebody's a mid-level developer, so it will take them 2 hours or whatever. this person, if you're troubleshooting a problem, they could have dealt with this same exact problem in another context 5 months ago. They know the answer immediately. And they took 2 hours or 8 hours to solve that problem, 5 months ago. And now today it takes them 5 minutes because they've fought through that, and hopefully they have their personal solutions log they've kept up to date to go reference that problem is solved, and they're on to the next challenge.
Exactly. It's so hard to tell.
Yeah, I get it. We have time for another challenge that you've fought through. So do you have another story that you can share with us as far as dealing with some of these issues?
Yeah, another challenge, an ugly challenge, is dealing with breaches. It's something that you don't ever want to really talk about because maybe it's like just talking about it will curse your website with it or something like that. People might think it's not a lucky topic to talk about, but it's something you have to be prepared for. And when they happen, it turns into an all hands on deck situation of immediately solve this, clear the breach, see if there's any other similar vulnerabilities on your system. If they're getting in via an API, an API that has an open endpoint, anyone could get into that. And maybe you have other code that has open endpoints. So it's a scary period. It's a rough period, and there's a lot of pressure on a development team to make sure it doesn't happen again. But
absolutely.
Of course, I mean, with breaches, I hate to say it, you're always going to be playing catch up. It's sort of it's a tough situation because there's always going to be some hacker out there, some bad actor who can find a vulnerability before you can patch it.
Absolutely. And obviously it goes to say, without saying, we got to keep our platforms up to date. But even then, one of the most recent ones I experienced was a couple of years ago. We were pushing this company to get their site updated and all the modules and all that stuff updated, and they just didn't want to spend the money, the time, which kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. And yeah, they had a breach. And so the challenge was finding where that breach happened, because it looked like it was one thing, but in reality, it was a vulnerable module. And, and I don't even think that was in the vulnerability database that, who is it that puts that out? It's really good. Was it Willem Sansek? I can't remember who puts that out, but there's a database of vulnerable Magento modules. And it wasn't even in there yet. But it was very clear somebody had generously given themselves admin access to the entire website. And I don't think, if I remember correctly, anything else had happened past that in the form of like injecting malicious code or anything like that we found.
Yeah.
But I will say, actually, one other thing that's helpful in that having a proper CI process, actually CD process, makes it so easy to get the site back, at least the file system, so that the file system has not been compromised. Obviously making a backup before that's really important, as that was critical to be able to run some forensics there. But yeah, it is no fun.
And you said the magic word there, that it feels like forensics when you're investigating a breach. And for me, it happens on sites that I work with every day, and you get a connection with the websites you work with. And when all of a sudden there's a breach that someone uses, I'm not even trying to be dramatic, but it's as if someone broke into my house or something.
Oh, I understand the feeling, 100%.
You find the vulnerability and you patch it, and it's like, well, I'm glad that I solved that, but I still feel dirty. It's a terrible feeling, but it's also very, very satisfying when you do plug that vulnerability, because that that one specific thing can't happen again. And just like if, God forbid, a house gets broken into, you buy a security system after that.
That's right.
And you be a little bit more on the ball about making sure the windows are locked, that sort of a thing. So it's a rough situation, but also it gives you the opportunity to beef up security protocols, which can sometimes go by the wayside because that stuff isn't necessarily
There's no
fun. It's
ROI.
not fun. No, there is not at all. You spend a lot of time, and at the end of the day, like, did it make the website another dollar? No,
Nope.
but it's safer.
Yeah,
but it did make us another dollar.
Exactly. And yeah, and it's communicating some of that stuff is really tricky. And I totally agree. It's how do you help management to see that? And I think it's through these conversations. And you might not win on the first conversation, but I just actually had a conversation with somebody yesterday saying, hey, look, we talked about this before. You weren't interested, but I really think you need to do this. And I think that subtle, kind, gentle pressure really helps in maybe it's not accepted on the first shot, but maybe after the second or third conversation, when warranted, it would be helpful. Because again, that's the problem, is that security there's zero ROI, zero appreciable ROI. Ultimately, if there's a vulnerability and you have to email your customer saying, hey, your information was just stolen, we're really sorry about that. That's really negative ROI. So, preventing that from happening is ultimately where the ROI comes in.
Yeah, and you said something very, very interesting there about having a connection with the company or with your client or something, and instead of using scare tactics like, this has happened, you might lose millions of dollars. Instead of using scare tactics, you connect with them on a personal level and explain to them why it's necessary on a personal level. And I feel like that is a much better way to handle going into something like this than starting off by just trying to scare them into that change.
Exactly. I totally agree. Yes, that's good. Security is a very important part of our development, and I guess this probably would be interesting to talk about security protocols and to make sure that we as developers are building secure applications. What are some of the things to talk about there? And so maybe we'll have to come on, because we haven't talked too much on this podcast about security. And it's really important because security starts from the ground up. We can write code all day, every day, and then get in there and write a really lousy SQL query that allows for SQL injection directly from our post variables, and doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it's something you have to be vigilant about it. There are days where you just need to get some code out, and look, we just need to make a quick form on the front end, and maybe you're not super careful about making sure it has a key attached to it or something, and all it takes is one little oversight like that, and then it's only a matter of time.
That's right. Absolutely, I get that. It's very important. And just, I guess, one suggestion. Well, maybe if you have a suggestion or two we can throw out, but on security, being very familiar with the OWASP top 10. That's, I don't know. I just throwing out a number here. I'd guess it's at least 90% of the security vulnerabilities that, we as application developers could easily protect against. There's still a bazillion more, but those are incredibly common, and making sure our code is up to snuff there, that we've taken into account those things, and we're just always thinking about them, even like printing it out and putting it on our desk. Like it just doesn't hurt, those constant reminders to as we're building our website. And it also goes to show why Magento does stuff like they did, like as opposed to us going in there and disabling the CSRF checker on a given controller. Okay, well, this is why they do it. In fact, it'd be better if we built our code to work with the Magento side as opposed to just completely ignoring the Magento side, because, it's a pain to work with sometimes.
Yeah, no, that is true. You honestly took my number one. OAuth is so it's great because it is, we're thinking alike on that. It's so easy to get through those endpoints if you don't keep track of them well enough. And like you're saying, Magento has a lot of them, and the way they do it is very well done. So what we do is any additional endpoint that we're responsible for, it gets documented. And I know exactly which one of our API, which one of our users has permission for each of these endpoints.
Hmm.
It may seem like overwhelming, like you have so much to keep track of, but at the end of the day, outside of Magento, which we know is going to be secure, any custom endpoints we add, it's only a couple dozen or something like that, and you keep track of those, and that way you don't you don't forget building one and all of a sudden you realize 6 months later, I forgot to put any kind of security on that, and you realize that maybe someone got in or something like that. So
Exactly.
I love documentation. My team they're probably sick of it by now, how much I love to make sure everything's documented, but that's one of the things I think it's very crucial. In addition to that, I think a good thing to keep track of is making sure the front end teams and the back end teams are always on the same page about when they add something that could affect the other side of it. Like when a front end team adds a form element or a whole form or something like that, the front end team does that. The back end team needs to be aware so they can add the appropriate checks to make sure this is an Ajax coming from Ajax, or making sure the form key is correct. So communications between teams when you might be doing something the other team might not catch is super critical.
That's good. That's really good. And I want to clarify one thing, Ryan. I was saying my suggestion was the OWASP top 10. And so the list of the major vulnerabilities, you were talking about OAuth, right? In OAuth and specifically in relation to Web API. Was that? I just want to make sure we're clear.
I thought you said OAuth is in your top 10.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. I apologize. I meant OWASP top 10. They sound really similar.
Okay.
They sound, yes.
I need my third cup of coffee. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no. It's funny.
That's funny.
I am constantly working on my diction, my vocabulary. It's just something with how my mouth is wired. But a lot of people, when I say, "Hey, I'm Joseph," they always say, "Hey, Joshua." So I'm sure that was my deal there. So that's good. And it's easy, I think, and I'll just say this: it's really easy to write a endpoint. Well, to be frank, I love the API. I use the API all the time. And so I can see how that can provide some extra options for disaster, if you will. And it's always a good reminder to make sure when we're specifying a new endpoint that we never use the anonymous unless we are consciously 100% that is necessary. Past that, it should always have a resource attached to it, and maybe occasionally let there be the customer authentication. But anonymous. Have
you ever had one where in a situation where anonymous was the right method to use? Because I don't think I ever have.
I have, and what as an example on our swiftauto.com, using for the practice test, for example, to load just general information to power the View app on the front. Those are anonymous access. To purchase, I believe, is also anonymous access. All that's anonymous access, and then we can spin up this the customer session or the checkout session as necessary. But those are all anonymous access. We do have a couple of them. I think the purchase is locked down by reCAPTCHA. So, that is another layer of authentication. But for most of the other stuff we do, for example, a lot of our admin work is all uses APIs, and it's really easy to create an OAuth key, and render that out in the source code, and then have that picked up and pushed up. So, you can put expiration dates and expirations and all that on there. So, but yeah, there's been a couple of instances. It's definitely not the most, and I just came across a project the other day. It's 4 years old, so that was unfortunate, but it allows you to cache using Varnish or just the Magento internal full page cache. Allows you to cache those API responses, which actually sounds like a pretty cool deal. So I'll be looking into that. Wow. Maybe get some resurrection done on that. So anyways, that was a great conversation. What are you doing in our last couple minutes here? What are you doing to improve your skills and grow? And I think, and I'm going to just say this, you're in a more of a management position. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So you're probably less in the code than you were whenever before you were in this management position. So I think this question is incredibly important. So what do you do to maintain your skills to keep up with the code, this changing stuff over the course of time? Because while Magento 2 is not reiterating on itself, it's still changing on a regular basis.
It is. Not only is is your internal code base changing with all your developers working on things, but Magento, the versions don't stop coming.
Nope.
It's true. Over the last year, 6 months, there's been a lot less coding going on. A lot of code review, but a lot less coding. And I mean, I know I speak for a lot of people who sort of transition to this position. Like, I still love coding. I've been doing it forever. It's something that makes me really happy, you know?
Yes.
So there's a professional answer, which is always keep up with the Magento code base. Make sure you're not just reviewing your team members' code, but actually like getting in there and seeing why they made the decisions they made. So be very involved with the code base to see not only like what's coming up from Magento, but also making sure all your extensions on your site all the modules are playing nicely with each other.
Yeah.
But so that's the professional answer. But the more personal answer for me is always have some project to yourself that you're working on at home. You know, you could have like a little Raspberry Pi set up with a server, or you could buy some cheap web space somewhere, but have projects for yourself, things that make you happy, something that keeps your mind interested in code, even though it's not something you're doing necessarily all day anymore. So I've built ones in the past. I've done, when I was younger, I made a program to handle my personal finances. And as I grew older, I made a fun little web app that tracked all the concerts I went to. So those have been little projects I've always worked on. But also there's great websites like Code Wars. You familiar with Code Wars?
Yes.
Code Wars is a lot of fun. If anyone hasn't heard of it, it's a website where you're presented with these coding puzzles in tons of languages. You're presented with these coding puzzles that have certain difficulty ratings, and your job is to solve them. And if your output matches what the puzzle's looking for, then you get some points. It's gamified, which is of course a lot of fun. But something like that, where you're if you don't have a personal project necessarily that's coming to mind, a site like Code Wars, where you're given these little projects. It reminds me of back when I was learning to develop and I was doing the old convert Fahrenheit to Celsius sort of like puzzle stuff. So yeah, keep your mind active and keep yourself happy doing little projects that make you happy. That's not just work.
That's great. I love that, because that's the stuff that can really motivate you and get you fired up and keep being excited. Because like we've talked about some on this podcast, is that burnout is real. It can be very real. And though that is one of the very specific suggestions that has been recommended to keep your enthusiasm going in that. And who knows, it could turn out to be that side project could turn out to be your next move in your career, you know, and it's definitely happened for quite a lot of people. And then maybe you need another side project so you don't get burned out. I don't know how that workflow goes, but exactly, it's so good to do that. So yeah, this is really good, Ryan. Thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts out of your busy day and fighting fires and all the great stuff that you do. I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. It was an absolute pleasure to come on and smash the bug with you. Yeah. And as a side note, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for the Magento community. I've been using SwiftOtter for years and years and years, and I've gotten a certification from you guys. I've spent a lot of time in the guides, and I think when it comes to resources for passing those certifications, I number one always recommend my developers to check out SwiftOtter. You guys have great guides, and there's video guides too. It's awesome. So thank you for doing what you do.
My pleasure. That's been a side project of mine, and I've enjoyed it. I do enjoy it, and it's been
Awesome.
an absolute pleasure to do that. So thank you, Ryan, for coming on.
Congrats on the new book too.
Yeah, I'm super stoked about that, and it's great to already start hearing some wonderful feedback about that, and I am so stoked because I believe it's a game changer, a productivity transformer in being able to solve problems quickly, and so it's all a matter how you approach it. So, anyways, yeah. Thank you for coming on, Ryan. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks again.
Wow, that was an absolute pleasure having Ryan on here today and just talking about a little bit more of high-level concepts about approaching problems, solving problems, and that really important conversation about security. Yeah, it's not something we like to talk about, particularly like Ryan said, it's like a dirty word because if we start talking about breaches, well, then somebody might think that we're responsible for a breach. And to be frank, we could be at some point. It's bound to happen. If you're any type of developer, you've probably written quite a little code, and within code, stuff happens. And it's probably going to be an inevitability at some point. But being honest with ourselves, saying that this is a possibility is probably the very best way that we can actually prevent such a problem in the long run. So, my friends, as you're listening to this, take note. Take caution as far as how you build stuff. Review the OWASP, OWASP top 10. Make sure you review that, as well as, like Ryan was saying, it's an easy thing. We build out an API endpoint as anonymous. We don't have to want to deal with the authentication, but we go commit that code as anonymous, and that endpoint is now publicly available for some scumbag on the internet to try to go exploit that endpoint, and it's not good. So watch what you're doing, be conscientious, care about the code that you're writing, and that all goes into making you an excellent developer. Thanks for participating in our podcast today. I am already looking forward to our next one.